When we think of the TurboGrafx 16 here in the States, we think of the beginning of the 16-bit war. The year was 1989 and Sega had just gotten its ass kicked on the 8-bit market.
Stop! He's already dead!
The Genesis was the advanced, fresh start it needed for the 4th generation of consoles, only it had to deal with the new kid on the block, the TurboGrafx 16. But in Japan it didn't play out like this. Let's roll back 2 years to 1987. Hudson Soft had been in business with Nintendo for some time now, developing Famicom titles as Nintendo's first third-party vendor. They even let them port a version of Super Mario Bros. To the PC 8801 and the Sharp X1 Japanese computers, called Super Mario Bros. Special. So you could say, Hudson had a pretty comfortable relationship with Nintendo in the early days of the Famicom. But Hudson wanted to be more than just a third-party vendor, and so they decided to start tinkering and creating add-ons for the Famicom that would utilize new chips and the B cards, which were developed by Hudson to be used on the MSX computer. But Nintendo, as Nintendo does, shut them down. Funny to think that a somewhat similar situation would play out many years later with Sony. This is how Hudson came to design the C62 chip that would eventually evolve into the PC Engine video game console. The thing is that the PC Engine was supposed to compete with the Famicom when it was released in 1987. That makes perfect sense since the PC Engine is technically an 8-bit system with a spruced up standalone video graphics chip to assist with the graphics. But when the Mega Drive was released by Sega in October of 1988, it did set off some flags over at Hudson Soft. While the PC Engine was a huge upgrade when compared to the Famicom, it was now on par, or in some cases, technically inferior to the true 16-bit console on the Japanese market. Suddenly, they had not only competition that could go toe-to-toe with the PC Engine, it now had another console to eat away at profits. So Hudson decided to develop a true 16-bit console to compete against the Mega Drive and get a jump on Nintendo's next console. But was it really a 16-bit console? Well, this is where things get a little bit interesting. This new system was marketed to the Japanese consumer not as a standalone new console, which from a physical standpoint, it was, but it was an actual upgrade. This was highlighted by the fact that the new console will be backwards compatible with the PC Engine games. This was made possible by utilizing the same hue card format as the PC Engine. The new console was labeled as the PC Engine 2 during production before changing the name to SuperGrafx. But because of this backwards compatibility functionality, NEC stuck the same CPU chip that was in the original PC Engine on the SuperGrafx, only slightly modified, which means that this new 16-bit system meant to compete with the actual 16-bit Genesis console, or Mega Drive in this case, was still in its simplest form an 8-bit system. So what did NEC pack into it to make it think it could compete with the Mega Drive and the upcoming Super Famicom? Well, for one, it quadrupled the working RAM from 8 kilobytes on the PC Engine to 32 for the SuperGrafx. Video RAM went from 64 kilobytes to 128. The SuperGrafx also had 2 video controllers versus just 1 for its predecessor, plus 1 added layer for better parallax scrolling that would also allow animation in it, giving games more depth and more detail. But despite the huge upgrade as far as RAM and adding an additional video controller, the system could only display 512 colors on screen at once, just like the PC Engine. I'm thinking that NEC thought since it was still a huge upgrade from 64 on the Mega Drive and 256 on the upcoming Super Famicom, staying with the same color palette and 9-bit color scheme that made the PC Engine shine would help in keeping costs down. And this is something that NEC was struggling to do with the SuperGrafx. You see, adding that much RAM back then was a big deal because RAM was very expensive. This alone caused the manufacturing cost of the unit to stay high. It had a port on the back that was similar to that of the one we saw here on the TurboGrafx 16, which would allow the CD-ROM player add-on to connect to it. It was also found on the original PC Engine, but was more conspicuous on that unit. And as if they had not learned their lesson, or maybe they just wanted to still nickel and dime you to death, they put only one controller port on the unit. Again. Did you not learn anything, NEC? Audio on the SuperGrafx was only slightly upgraded, giving the option of digital to analog conversion. Allowing sound sampling to be streamed onto the 6 channels, and when it paired up with the CD-ROM drive, could enhance the sound of the unit by outputting CD/DA audio and a single ADPCM channel on top of the 6 channels already found on the SuperGrafx console. I have no idea what any of that means other than the sound on the unit is better than the TurboGrafx, but only slightly. There are channels that go over this in lots of detail here on YouTube, so check those out. So what happened to the SuperGrafx? Why did it fail so fast that it barely made a bleep on the history of video gaming? Well, let's take a look. First, we're gonna go with the pricing. It released in Japan with a price point equivalent to about $300 US, with no packing game. That's not too bad, but the problem here is that the SuperGrafx Hue cards cost close to $100, according to Wikipedia. Although no specific reliable source is provided, and I couldn't find any online, believe it or not. If that was the case, then a SuperGrafx with a game would cost $400 alone. This was for a souped up PC Engine system that was still 8-bit underneath it all. It was also hard to rationalize purchasing one when it was released on the same day as the Core Graphics, which was a slightly modified PC Engine unit with a revamped CPU to address audio issues and swapped the old audio connector with a composite video AV port. This meant that as a consumer, you could buy a slightly modified PC Engine, which already had a huge game library for maybe around $170, versus a new system with almost no games for almost twice the cost. Aside from the limited library, the console was still held back by the Hue card design. You see, unlike the NES, which used cards that could house specialized chips used to enhance games with abilities not possible with the hardware alone, the Hue cards did not have this capability. The games were stuck with whatever the hardware could do and go no further. Sure, programming tricks and expertise gained by years of working on the console does allow developers to squeeze a bit more juice from the hardware, but there is a limit. Even simple things like a battery password feature is not possible with Hue cards. As games kept getting more complicated, a battery save feature would be way more convenient when compared to longer and longer passwords. Check out my video on passwords. Remember now, on the TurboGrafx, you had to buy a Turbo Booster plus add-on just to save a game. Or maybe you were lucky enough to have an actual CD-ROM add-on, which would allow you to save games but only had a few slots to use. Speaking of the CD-ROM drive add-on, if you had the first hardware model of that, you could not attach it to the SuperGrafx unless you bought an add-on. Thank you so much, NEC. It's ridiculous and a big reason why I think the TurboGrafx system had a hard time here in the West. Watch my video on that too. So this add-on here was required to attach the CD-ROM, but if you had the Super System 2 CD unit, you did not need the adapter. By the way, before I forget to mention, all the PC Engine peripherals were fully compatible with the SuperGrafx. That alone, I'm shocked NEC didn't repackage everything as Super and sold it as a brand new add-on. Would you look at that? On top of the few things that I just mentioned, there were the games. All 5 of them. Yep, that's it, just 5. This console and the Virtual Boy have the smallest libraries for any major console out there. 5 games were made specifically for the SuperGrafx, with 2 others being made as standard PC Engine games that could be enhanced if played on a SuperGrafx. Let's take a quick look at the games. 1941 is a direct arcade port of the famous Capcom overhead shooter series. This one is actually pretty damn close in terms of looks. Seeing them side by side, and you can tell that the system did actually have the chops to do what few consoles at that time could do when it came to porting an arcade game of that caliber to the home side. Not bad. Next up is Dai Maikamura, better known to us as Ghouls and Ghosts, which I mentioned briefly on my last video. This is a very close port of the arcade and a big upgrade from the very well done Mega Drive version, which I actually love. If you saw the arcade port side by side, you could see that it was pretty damn faithful, even retaining the famous intro sequence, which the Mega Drive version omitted. This one was very heavily marketed as the killer app for the console before it released and shortly afterwards. It is a great title and a great showcase of what the system was capable of. Next is Aldines. This title is a very mediocre game with some really shoddy gameplay for a side-scrolling shooter. Let me just put it this way. Take a look at this game, and then let's take a look at R-Type side by side, and explain to me how you can justify a game like this existing on a system that is supposed to be almost twice as capable when it comes to graphics when you have the regular PC Engine having a game that looks light years better, plus the cost. Battle Ace. Well, how bad is this game? Well, let's put it this way, it has no Wikipedia article for it, yet the other titles do. So let's start there. This game is like playing Top Gun on the NES with lots more color, and that's about it. Again, another title that makes you wonder if you were completely drunk and out of your mind if you had bought a SuperGrafx and had this title to show for it. I feel bad for you. I'm sorry. Last is Mado King Grandsword, which is a game based on an anime about a boy that can summon a mech and is joined by others that can do the same. In the game, you actually play as these robots to aid you on your quest. It's an action platformer, and luckily, it seems someone somewhere learned their lesson from Keith Courage and omitted the parts where you can play as the kid and went straight into the robot part of the game. Even if Keith Courage had done that, it still sucks. That game sucks, I'm sorry. Problem here is that the game is still a very mediocre take on an action platformer. I couldn't get past the first boss, and frankly, I really didn't want to try anymore. At least the graphics here are vibrant and somewhat sharp. Now, there were two more games available on the SuperGrafx. That would be Darius Plus and Darius Alpha. Darius Plus only removed a lot of the flickering if you played that game on the SuperGrafx versus the PC Engine. Darius Alpha was a promotional mail order game that is also enhanced when played on the SuperGrafx. This one had you basically playing a boss rush mode of all the bosses from Darius Plus. Aside from that, this one is actually considered one of the most rare PC Engine games if you are into collecting, so good luck with that. There were also many ports that were supposed to come to the SuperGrafx but were cancelled and ported over to other systems. One of those titles would have been a Strider game on the SuperGrafx, but it was cancelled obviously and ported over to the CD-ROM system after the SuperGrafx failed to barely move the needle on the Japanese video game market. All in all, the system ended up only moving around 75,000 units. Not 750,000, 75,000. That's it. That's not even coming close to breaking the 100,000 mark. Try looking up lists of the worst selling consoles of all times online, and you're gonna see that for some reason, time and time again, the SuperGrafx is never mentioned on these lists. Yeah, that's how bad it did. Yet, for some reason, most of these lists mention the Hyperscan, which sold even less than the SuperGrafx, with only 30,000 units, yet never the SuperGrafx.
Erased from existence.
The console was rushed to the market in 1989, only 2 years after the release of the PC Engine. Problem here is that this console was sandwiched between the Mega Drive and the Super Famicom.
Excuse me.
Pardon me, buddy.
I'm squeezed in the middle.
While at the same time, trying to cannibalize sales of the existing and still very popular PC Engine market. So in some ways, the SuperGrafx was going up against 3 consoles. The other problem is that the PC Engine, when it was released, it was a huge upgrade from the Famicom. This was evidently clear just by looking at the games. It stood out right away. Better had, considering the PC Engine had a 4-year gap to advance. But when the SuperGrafx came out, it was supposed to do the exact same thing, but with a much smaller time frame. This time with only 1 year when it was rushed out in 1989. This meant that the huge tech leap the PC Engine had enjoyed on the Famicom was not available when going up against the Mega Drive. No doubt that Hudson was very nervous about the impact the Mega Drive was having not only in sales, but by being the true 16-bit hardware out on the market, the Mega Drive was starting to attract developers to it, and that could hurt the pockets of Hudson in the long run. Think about it. If you were a game developer, would you rather be working on your next hit on the new 16-bit system with, for that time, having untapped potential, or for the aging PC Engine hardware? Developers no doubt saw this and left the SuperGrafx with a well dry of third-party support. Something that Sega had learned with the Master System is a death penalty in the gaming landscape. Throw in the fact that the Super Famicom was making huge waves on both sides of the pond, and you can see that the SuperGrafx was stuck between a rock and a hard place. To top it all off, NEC themselves rebranded and repackaged the original PC Engine as the Core Graphics and released that version on the exact same day as the SuperGrafx. What the hell were you thinking, NEC? The way I see it, this system is the 32X of the 80s, plain and simple. A company had a good console that was making waves and decided to release a semi-upgraded device meant to bridge the jump from one generational console to the next. Only both failed to do so properly. The technology wasn't quite there due to it being rushed, and the timing, it was also off. Had it been released as an actual add-on as opposed to the fully standalone console in the $300 price range, with games that didn't cost close to $100, and the system might have been able to survive a while longer while NEC worked on a true 16-bit or better successor. Oh wait, yeah, they did do that. You know, I'm going to be covering the PCFX on my next video, so you don't want to miss that one, trust me. Anyone here ever get their hands on an imported SuperGrafx? Anyone here even heard of it? If so, do you see this system as one of the worst consoles of all time based on its financial failure? Or was it a good console that was just released with bad timing? Share with us all, and until next video, keep watching and keep gaming.
Erased from existence.